My greedy wife deserted me over Grandpa's worthless farm inheritance, until the buried secret ignited my revenge. The rain hammered against the stained glass windows of the church, a mournful rhythm for my grandfather's funeral. The pews were crammed with the whole town, their hushed whispers weaving through the eulogies, all buzzing about the contents of his will. Everyone assumed Grandpa had a war fortune stashed away. I sat numbly beside my wife, Clara, whose posture was rigid with impatience. Beside her, her mother, Evelyn, looked as if she'd smelled something foul. When the lawyer finally read the will, his voice droned until it landed on my name. To his grandson, Mark, he leaves the farm. Just the farm, 100 acres of run-down, weed-choked, seemingly worthless land. A collective sigh of disappointment filled the church. Clara's face twisted into a mask of pure disgust, and Evelyn let out an audible snort. "Dirt," she hissed, loud enough for the entire front row to hear. I squared my shoulders, my voice firm despite the tremor of grief. "Grandpa wanted me to keep it. I will." Clara's laugh was sharp and brittle, a shard of glass in the solemn air. "You're choosing dirt over our future? Over me?" Humiliation burned my neck. She snatched her purse, her heels clicking an angry staccato on the stone floor as she stormed out, leaving me alone before a sea of pitying eyes. Her final words, shouted from the doorway, were a curse: "Don't come crawling back when you realize how worthless that land is." Hashtag if you're watching this, subscribe, like and let me know where you're watching from. 2 weeks of suffocating silence passed before a plain shoebox appeared on my porch, a cruel, informal delivery. Clara's elegant cursive was unmistakable. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, were divorce papers, crisp and official. Beside them, my wedding ring lay cold and heavy, stripped of all its former warmth and meaning. Tucked into the papers was a note, a final, venomous stab: "You married up, Mark, but you'll die a farmer." The words stole my breath. Rage, a hot, blinding force, boiled up from my gut, followed by the crushing weight of betrayal. 20 years. 2 decades of me working late shifts, taking on extra jobs, all so she could have the lunches, the clothes, the status she craved. Now, she discarded me with the casual cruelty of someone throwing out old shoes. Grief buckled my knees, and I sank to the floor, the papers scattering around me. As I gathered the mess, my fingers brushed against another envelope, hidden beneath where the ring had been. It was Grandpa's familiar, shaky scrawl: "For Mark, when you feel lost." With a surge of desperate hope, I tore it open. His words were a lifeline in a drowning sea: "That farm ain't worthless, son. Trust me." Clara thought she had left me with nothing, but this letter changed the entire game. Grandpa's words were a seed of defiance, and in that moment, I knew revenge would be my harvest. Grandpa's cryptic last words echoed in my mind for days: "Don't sell the land. Dig deep." It felt less like advice and more like a command, a map to a place I couldn't see. The following dawn, I drove out to the farm, the tires of my truck crunching over the weed-choked gravel. The old house sagged under the weight of time and neglect, its windows like vacant eyes. Just as he'd promised in his letter, the keys were hanging on a rusty nail behind the front door. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and memories. On the rickety kitchen table, an old, yellowed map of the property lay waiting for me, marked with a single, faded red X right under the sprawling branches of the ancient oak tree out back. My heart hammered against my ribs. Dig deep. Grabbing a shovel from the barn, I began to tear into the hard-packed earth. Hours bled into one another. Sweat soaked my shirt, and blisters formed, broke, and bled on my palms. Clara's mocking laughter echoed in my head: "Worthless." Just as doubt began to poison my resolve, the shovel struck something with a hard, metallic clang. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me, and I dug with renewed frenzy, my bare hands clawing at the dirt. I was about to uncover the truth. After clearing the last of the stubborn clay, I unearthed a rusted ammunition box, heavy and sealed by time. With a crowbar from the barn, I pried the lid open. The contents weren't what I expected. Instead of a weapon or old relics, the box held a collection of faded ledgers, a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings from the 1940s, and a broken silver locket. I opened the locket to find a tiny, sepia-toned photograph of a young woman, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed to transcend the decades. Under the dim light of the farmhouse kitchen, I pored over the ledgers. The pages were filled with my grandfather's neat script, detailing a series of hidden sales during the war. Vast sums of money were recorded, exchanged for what was simply listed as passage, but there was no record of where the money went. The newspaper clipping spoke of chaos in Europe, of wealthy families desperate to flee. It was a puzzle of shadows and whispers. Then, on the very last page of the final ledger, a single, chilling line in Grandpa's handwriting, "It's all still here." My mind reeled. Was he talking about the money? Hidden somewhere on this very farm? The farm Clara had called worthless. A cold, determined smile touched my lips. She hadn't just deserted me, she had abandoned a fortune. The next morning, I drove into town and laid the ledgers on the polished desk of Mr. Harlan, my grandfather's old lawyer. His office, filled with the scent of leather and old paper, felt like a sanctuary of secrets. As he turned the fragile pages, the color drained from his face. He looked up at me over his spectacles, his expression grim. "Mark, this is dangerous," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. "This details off-the-books transactions, likely gold. If others know or even suspect this money exists, they will come looking for it." He spoke of Grandpa's quiet heroism, his reputation for helping people escape the war. "Your grandfather was a good man, but he made powerful enemies and dealt with desperate people. Be careful." The warning sent a chill down my spine, especially when I recalled how Clara's family had been pressuring Grandpa to sell in his final days. That night, a violent gust of wind was followed by the unmistakable sound of shattering glass downstairs. I grabbed Grandpa's old shotgun from the mantel as my dog, Rusty, erupted in a frenzy of barking. A shadow flickered past the window and disappeared into the woods. I gave chase but lost them in the darkness. But in the mud by the broken window, I found a clear boot print. It was the exact size and brand worn by Hank, Clara's worthless brother. She'd sent him. The morning light confirmed my fears, illuminating Hank's boot prints as if they were a signed confession. Clara hadn't just left, she was now sending her muscle to sniff around the property, hunting for a treasure she didn't even believe in. Fear gave way to a cold, hardening fury. Rusty, my loyal old mutt, growled low in his throat, sensing my change in mood. They had deserted me, mocked me, and now they were trying to intimidate me, to steal a legacy they couldn't comprehend. Her note, "Die a farmer," wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. I spent the day fortifying the old farmhouse, boarding the broken window, barring the doors, checking every lock. The house no longer felt like a decaying relic, it felt like a fortress, Grandpa's fortress. I checked on the box of ledgers, the locket with the frightened woman's eyes seeming to watch me. Hank's clumsy break-in attempt proved they suspected something, that their greed was a ravenous, insatiable beast. That night, I heard the distant rumble of an engine idling down the road before it sped away. They were watching. Good. Let them watch. Let them wonder. A grim smile spread across my face. The game had changed. I was no longer the grieving husband, I was the guardian of a secret, and I would use it to burn their world to the ground. A few days later, driven by Grandpa's mantra to dig deep, I started exploring the parts of the farmhouse I'd ignored since childhood. The cellar was damp and smelled of rich earth and forgotten time. Behind a stack of Grandpa's old, dusty crates filled with canning supplies, I noticed the mortar in the stone wall looked different, newer. Prying at it with a crowbar, I discovered it was a false wall. Behind it, a heavy, sealed wooden door. My heart hammered in my chest. With a groan of rusted hinges, the door swung inward, revealing a small, hidden room. My breath caught in my throat. Shelves lined the stone walls, and on them sat dozens of dusty crates. I pried one open and found it packed with sealed glass jars. And inside those jars, gleaming softly in the beam of my flashlight, were gold coins. Hundreds of them. There were crates upon crates, a fortune beyond my wildest imaginings. This was Grandpa's secret. A legacy of honor, not greed. Just as the reality of it began to sink in, I heard the crunch of gravel outside. A car door slammed shut. Peeking through a grimy cellar window, I saw her polished luxury car. It was Clara, and her lawyer was with her. They were back. They smelled the money. I hastily sealed the hidden room and raced upstairs, trying to compose myself. Rusty was already barking at the front door. I opened it to find Clara standing there, dressed in a tight, expensive dress, a sickly sweet smile plastered on her face. Her lawyer, a slick man named Nick, stood beside her, looking smug. "Mark, darling," she cooed, stepping forward for a hug I didn't return. "I've missed you so much. Filing those papers was a terrible mistake. I want to start over." The lie was so audacious it almost made me laugh. She hadn't missed me, she missed the idea of my inheritance. Her eyes darted around the rustic living room, a flicker of disdain crossing her features before she masked it. "We should sell this place," Nick chimed in smoothly. "For a fair price, of course. For your future together." Clara nodded enthusiastically, but her greed betrayed her. Her gaze kept drifting towards the cellar door. Then, she made her mistake. "So," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you found something, didn't you?" Her eyes gleamed. Hank had talked. He must have told her about the ammunition box. I feigned ignorance, giving her a sad, weary smile. "Just a lot of old junk, Clara." But I knew, and she knew I knew. The hunt was on. That evening, I ordered a set of high-quality, motion-activated spy cameras online. When they arrived, I spent hours meticulously placing them throughout the house, one disguised as a book in the living room, another as a smoke detector in the kitchen, and a third pointed directly at the cellar door. Every feed was backed up to a secure cloud server. I was taking no chances. A few days later, Clara called, her voice dripping with fake concern, asking if she could stop by. "Of course," I said, playing the part of the broken-hearted fool. She arrived alone this time, and shortly after, her phone rang. It was her mother. Thinking I was out in the barn, Clara spoke freely, her voice sharp and cruel, every word captured by the hidden camera. "He's still playing dumb, Mom," she said, pacing the kitchen. "But he knows. We need to pressure him. Get Nick to forge the documents for the surrounding county land Grandpa co-owned. Hank's little visit clearly scared him. We can get him to sell cheap and take everything." My blood ran cold. They were planning to forge documents, to steal a legacy they had no right to. When she hung up, she turned to me with a brilliant, false smile. "Just checking in, sweetie." I smiled back, my mind already spinning. I emailed a copy of the recording to my old college friend, Ben, now an investigative journalist. The game was on. The ledgers contained more than just numbers. Tucked within the pages were mentions of a neighbor, Mr. Riley, whose farm bordered ours. I found him sitting on his porch, a man as weathered and sturdy as the oak trees surrounding his home. I showed him the ledgers and the locket. His eyes, faded with age, lit up with recognition. "Your grandpa," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was a hero. He told me a story I could scarcely believe. During the darkest days of World War II, my grandfather had used his farm as a stop on an underground railroad, smuggling Jewish families out of Europe. The gold wasn't stolen treasure, it was payment from those he saved, money used to fund safe houses and secure passage to freedom. It wasn't for him, Riley explained, his gaze distant. It was a trust. He kept it to keep future generations of your family and they're safe. He then pointed to the photo in the locket. That was my wife's sister. Your grandfather saved her life. A wave of profound pride and sorrow washed over me. My grandfather's worthless farm was a fortress of honor. The gold was sacred. As I prepared to leave, Riley added a chilling warning: others know about the gold, son. The descendants of some of those families. Not all of them are as grateful as we are. The phone rang late one night, the number blocked. I answered, and a low, gravelly voice spoke, devoid of any emotion. Sell the land, or you'll regret it. The line went dead. The threat was clear: Clara and her family were escalating from manipulation to intimidation. I immediately called the local sheriff, Dale, who also happened to be Clara's cousin. He listened with a bored sigh and dismissed it as a prank. Probably just some local kids messing with you, Mark, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. I knew then I was completely on my own. The law in this town was a tool for their family, not for justice. Fury, cold and pure, settled in my heart. Hank's break-in, the lawyer's pressure, and now this direct threat, it was all part of their coordinated attack. I spent the rest of the night checking the cameras, my shotgun resting across my lap as Rusty patrolled the perimeter. They thought they could scare me off, that I was the same soft man Clara had married. They were wrong. This farm, this legacy, was mine to protect. I would no longer be reacting to their moves. It was time for me to turn the tables and set a trap of my own. My plan took shape with chilling clarity. The next morning, I called Clara, letting my voice crack with feigned desperation. You're right, I told her. I can't do this alone. Let's talk. Come for dinner. Bring your mother. We can settle everything. She took the bait instantly. We'll be there tomorrow, she purred, the sound of victory in her voice. The rest of the day was a blur of methodical preparation. I double-checked every hidden camera, ensuring the angles were perfect and the audio was crystal clear. The cloud backups were secure. I emailed copies of all the evidence I had: the ledgers, the recording of Clara's phone call, the photo of Hank's boot print to myself and to my journalist friend, Ben, with the subject line, "Release on my signal." I was creating a dead man's switch. They could no longer silence me. I felt a profound shift inside. The victim was gone, replaced by a strategist. I was no longer grieving a dead marriage, I was defending my grandfather's honor. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, I stood on the porch, the old farmhouse solid at my back. I took a deep breath. Let's see how greedy they really are. Clara's luxury SUV crunched up the gravel driveway, a gaudy jewel in the rustic setting. She and her mother emerged, dressed like they were attending a gala, not dinner at a farmhouse. Clara wore pearls, Evelyn dripped with diamonds. How quaint, Evelyn sneered, eyeing the porch swing with disdain. Inside, they wrinkled their noses at the simple stew I'd prepared. I played the part of the humbled, broken man to perfection. This place is too much for me, I sighed, slumping into a chair. I think I'm ready to sell. Evelyn's eyes lit up with predatory glee. A very wise decision, she said, patting my hand with false sympathy. Throughout dinner, they peppered their conversation with thinly veiled insults about my life, my choices, and my grandfather's eccentricities. I let every barb land, my anger simmering beneath a placid surface. After the meal, I made my move. There's some of Grandpa's old stuff in the cellar I need to sort through before I sell, I said casually. Maybe you can help. Their greed was palpable as they followed me down the creaky steps. I led them toward the main room, away from the hidden door, and as they began to speak, I subtly flipped a hidden switch. A tiny red light, invisible to them, blinked to life on a dusty shelf. So, I said, turning to face them. Let's talk business. In the dim, musty air of the cellar, with the hidden camera rolling, their true natures emerged in all their grotesque glory. You have to have found the gold by now, Mark, Clara pressed, abandoning all pretense. Just sign the farm over, and we'll give you a small cut. Evelyn laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Don't be a fool. We know you're sitting on a fortune. Your grandfather was a sly old fox. Then, they began to brag. They detailed how they had pressured my grandfather on his deathbed, trying to get him to change his will. Evelyn proudly recounted how they had a forged sales agreement drawn up by their lawyer, ready to cheat me out of everything. Hank's little visit was just to scare you into making a quick, cheap sale, Clara admitted with a smirk. And it worked, didn't it? I stood there, absorbing every poisonous word, my hands clenched into fists in my pockets. They were desecrating the memory of a hero, a man who had risked everything for others, and they were proud of it. After a few more minutes of their vile plotting, I led them back upstairs. Thanks, I said with a tight smile as they left, smug and victorious. That's all I needed. The moment their car was out of sight, I sent the video files to Ben. Drop it tomorrow. The story broke the next morning and spread like wildfire. Ben had packaged it perfectly. The headline was devastating: Greedy family conspires to steal war hero's legacy for buried gold. The article included clips from the cellar confession, photos of the ledgers, and the chilling audio from the threatening phone call. Within hours, the video went viral. The public backlash was immediate and brutal. Millions of viewers watched Clara and Evelyn brag about manipulating a dying man. The comments were a torrent of outrage. My phone began to ring incessantly, but one call got through. It was Clara, her voice a hysterical shriek. Take it down, Mark. You have to take it down. You're ruining us, she sobbed. I listened for a moment to the sound of her world collapsing, the same way mine had at the funeral, and then I silently ended the call and blocked her number. Reports started flooding in. Evelyn was fired from her high-profile job on a charity board. Their country club membership was revoked. They were pariahs. The villains of my story had been unmasked, and their public humiliation was the most satisfying meal I'd ever had. My revenge was no longer a secret desire, it was a national headline. The fallout was a spectacle of karmic justice. Evelyn's face was plastered across tabloid magazines. Clara deleted her social media accounts, but the viral videos were everywhere. Friends who had once flocked to their parties now pretended not to know them. While their empire of lies crumbled, I found peace in quiet labor. I started restoring the old barn, the rhythmic strike of my hammer a therapeutic counterpoint to the storm raging online. The public, captivated by the story, had turned my grandfather into a posthumous national hero. Then, Ben called again, his voice electric with excitement. Mark, you're not going to believe this. The Historical Society sent a team to authenticate the farmhouse. They were checking the foundation, and they found a sealed box. My heart leaped. What was in it? I asked. Deeds, Ben said, his voice hushed with awe. Secretly filed deeds. It seems your grandfather owned half the county, all held in a private trust. That worthless farm isn't just a farm, Mark. It's the key to an empire. The news hit me like a physical blow. Just as I was processing it, I received an email from a lawyer. Clara was suing me, claiming marital rights to the newly discovered property. The discovery of the deeds transformed the situation entirely. My grandfather hadn't just left me a farm, he had left me a legacy of immense power and responsibility. The trust documents were ironclad, naming me as the sole heir and administrator. The timberlands, the commercial lots in town, the surrounding farmlands, it was all tied to my ownership of the original farmhouse. It was a brilliant move, a way to protect his life's work from the very greed that now sought to claim it. Clara's lawsuit was a desperate, transparent money grab. Her legal team argued that since the assets were discovered while we were technically still married, she was entitled to half. The public, however, was firmly on my side. Rallies were organized outside the courthouse, with people holding signs that read, "Honor a Hero," and "Justice for Mark." Ben's continued reporting kept the story in the national spotlight. Evelyn, facing foreclosure, was seen picketing with a sign accusing me of theft, a pathetic display that only earned her more scorn. I spent my nights walking the fields under the stars, the weight of my grandfather's trust settling on my shoulders. Clara had deserted me over what she thought was dirt. Now she was trying to claw her way back to claim a kingdom. The courtroom was a media circus. Cameras flashed, and reporters scribbled furiously as Clara took the stand, weeping crocodile tears about our shared dreams. Her lawyer argued passionately, painting me as a manipulative schemer hiding billions in assets. When it was my turn, my lawyer didn't grandstand. He simply said, "Your Honor, we have a few pieces of evidence to present." First, he played the crystal-clear recording of Clara's phone call with her mother, where she plotted to forge documents. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Next, he played the main event, the seller confession. The jury was mesmerized, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock, then to open disgust as they watched Clara and Evelyn brag about their deceit. Finally, my lawyer presented Grandpa's will and the trust documents, which explicitly stated that all assets were his ancestral legacy, to be passed directly down his bloodline. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, didn't need long to deliberate. She slammed her gavel down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Lawsuit dismissed on grounds of fraud and conspiracy," she declared. Mr. Thompson retains sole ownership. As cheers erupted, Clara leaped to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," she shrieked, before being escorted out of the courtroom. I knew her threat wasn't idle. That night, I was awakened not by a sound, but by an ominous, flickering orange glow against my bedroom window. The barn was on fire. Flames licked at the night sky, consuming the century-old timber with a terrifying roar. I stood helplessly with the firefighters, my heart sinking as I watched Grandpa's old tools, family photographs, and countless heirlooms turn to ash. The loss was a physical ache, a violation far worse than their greed. But they had made another mistake. The new surveillance cameras I'd installed around the property after Hank's first visit had captured everything. The footage was chillingly clear, Clara's brother, Hank, splashing gasoline on the barn walls, lighting the match, and fleeing into the darkness. The sheriff, Clara's cousin, had no choice this time. With federal investigators now involved due to the high-profile nature of the case, he was forced to act. As I sifted through the smoldering ruins at dawn, I didn't feel despair. I felt a cold, hard resolve. They had torched a building, but they had ignited a fire in me that would ensure they paid for everything they had done. Justice was no longer enough. I wanted to rebuild something better from their ashes. Instead of sinking into anger, I channeled my energy into rebuilding. The town, horrified by the arson, rallied around me. Volunteers arrived with lumber and tools, refusing any payment. The story of the fire and Hank's arrest on national news only strengthened their support. To honor my grandfather's true legacy, I sold a small number of the gold coins and made a large, anonymous donation to restore the town's dilapidated veterans' home, which was rededicated in his name. This act shifted the narrative again. I wasn't a man obsessed with revenge, I was a guardian of my grandfather's honorable spirit. The contrast between my actions and theirs was stark. News crews filmed the community rebuilding my barn while, on a split screen, they showed footage of Hank being led away in handcuffs. Under questioning, he quickly broke, confessing that Clara had orchestrated the whole thing, promising him a share of the fortune once I was broken and willing to sell. The final act was perfectly poetic. Based on Hank's confession, federal agents arrested Clara. A bystander filmed it on their phone. She was being pulled from a luxurious spa day, wrapped in a towel, her face a mask of disbelief and terror as they put her in cuffs. Hank's confession was the final nail in Clara's coffin. He admitted everything, that Clara had paid him for the arson, convinced that destroying my grandfather's most cherished heirlooms would break my spirit. The video of her Spot A arrest became an even bigger viral sensation than the confession tapes. The public delighted in the downfall of the woman who had everything and threw it away for greed. With Clara and Hank awaiting trial and Evelyn now homeless and ostracized, a quiet settled over the farm. My journalist friend, Ben, ever curious, called again. The investigators found something else, Mark, he said. While they were examining the property after the fire, they noticed the old well was capped with concrete. It's not on any of the original property plans. At his urging, a crew came out and carefully broke open the seal. Deep inside the dry well, they found several waterproof, military-grade crates. We hoisted them into the daylight. Inside were my grandfather's war journals, filled with harrowing, heroic tales. And on top of the last journal was a single, sealed letter addressed to me. I opened it with trembling hands. My dear Mark, it began, if you are reading this, then the woman you married has shown her true colors. This was her test, and your trial. I had to know if your heart was strong enough to protect our family's honor. Tears streamed down my face as I sat on the edge of the old stone well, reading Grandpa's final words. He had known. He had suspected Clara's greed all along and had constructed this entire posthumous test to see if I was worthy of the truth. The wealth wasn't just the gold or the land, it was the story, the honor, the legacy of saving lives. The journals were a testament to his courage, detailing the faces and names of the families he'd smuggled to safety, the close calls with Nazi patrols, and the quiet weight of his responsibility. It was a story far greater than one of hidden treasure. A profound sense of peace washed over me, a catharsis that cleansed the last vestiges of my anger and pain. The revenge was complete, but it felt hollow compared to the immense pride I felt for the man my grandfather was. I donated his journals to a national war museum so his story would never be forgotten. He was no longer just a local hero, he was a part of history. The secrets of the farm had finally all been unearthed, and in their place, a powerful sense of purpose had taken root. The last line of Grandpa's letter was the one that changed my future: the wealth isn't the gold, but what you choose to build from it. Now go build something lasting. The message was clear. Hoarding the fortune would be a betrayal of everything he stood for. The next day, I started the paperwork to create the Thompson Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to providing grants and support for struggling family farmers across the country, so they would never have to face the pressures my grandfather and I had. A major developer, hearing of my vast landholdings, offered me an obscene amount of money for the entire property. I politely declined, selling off only a small, non-essential parcel to provide the initial seed money for the foundation. My story, now one of philanthropy rather than revenge, hit the news again, with headlines praising my commitment to honoring my grandfather's legacy. Clara, facing a long prison sentence, watched it all from a television in her jail cell. My revenge was no longer about her ruin, it was about building a better world on the foundation of the one she tried to destroy. A few months later, a familiar property went up for a foreclosure auction, Evelyn's sprawling, ostentatious mansion, the very place where I had been mocked and looked down upon for years. Using a small portion of the funds from my land sale, I placed the winning bid. The town buzzed with speculation. Was I going to move in? Raze it to the ground? I did something better. I partnered with a local charity and converted the entire mansion into a homeless shelter. We named it Grandpa's Haven. The poetic justice was almost biblical. The house built on greed and status was now a sanctuary for the most vulnerable. The same local newspapers that had once printed Clara and Evelyn's society photos now ran front-page stories praising my generosity. The very people who had once whispered about the dirt farmer now stopped me in the street to shake my hand. One day, a letter arrived from prison. It was from Clara. She was begging for forgiveness. I held the letter for a long time, the paper feeling as weightless as her empty words. My ultimate revenge wasn't her downfall, it was my ascent. Clara's letter was a rambling, pathetic plea, filled with remorse that had bloomed only in the barren soil of a prison cell. "I finally understand what mattered," she wrote. "The gold is worthless without a heart to guide it." Driven by a final, fading flicker of pity, I visited her. The woman I saw behind the thick plate glass was a stranger, her hair dull, her eyes hollow, the fire of her ambition extinguished, leaving only the cold ash of regret. She wept when she saw me, pressing her hand to the glass. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she whispered. "I destroyed everything." I looked at her, not with hatred, but with a profound and sorrowful distance. "I forgave you a long time ago, Clara," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I've moved on." I stood up and walked away without looking back, leaving her to the life she had chosen. As I drove back to the farm, the setting sun bathed the fields in a warm, golden light. The house stood proudly on the hill, no longer a rundown relic, but a symbol of strength and honor. It was the same worthless land that had cost me my marriage but given me back my soul. Grandpa was right, you really do have to dig deep to find what's worth keeping. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now.